people already trickling in, so I'd like to welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. And this the first of the ongoing joint Northwell Health, Vishnick, McGovern, Milizio, LGBTQ Health and Life Planning webinar series. This will be an ongoing webinar series launching today, and then we're going to have 4 weekly sessions during June, which is Pride Month, and then with some frequency to be determined following. Each webinar will deal with a different topic. Today would be primarily HIV PrEP and LGBTQ health from the medical perspective, and estate planning from the legal perspective. I'd like to take this opportunity and also tell you that tentatively set for July 8th, COVID conditions allowing, we will be starting a joint pro bono trans clinic designed to inform and support transitioning people and their families through all stages of process with medical and legal needs, name changes, gender marker changes, healthcare proxy, powers of attorney, et cetera, et cetera. We will be sending out more information about that as the time nears. To those of you, there are a couple of names that I don't recognize from our client list. So to those of you who are unfamiliar with Vishnick, McGovern, Milizio, or VMM, we are a full-service law firm providing a comprehensive, tailored legal services to all your personal and business needs. We have 3 offices in New York City, in Lake Success, Long Island, and in Oakhurst, New Jersey. Our LGBTQ representation practice, which Mr. Milizio leads, he is also the managing partner of the firm, is one of our most robust practices, and it's one of the very first in the nation. It's one of the oldest in the country. And it's specialized, it's very multifaceted. It includes things like employment law and estate planning and family law and other aspects. And again, designed to provide really tailored and comprehensive solutions to all the needs. And on that note, I would like to welcome Joe Milizio to say a few words, and he'll in turn introduce Dr. Rosenthal.
Thank you very much, Roy, and welcome everybody on this rainy afternoon. Dr. Rosenthal, I happen to know from speaking to you earlier that you're not sitting outside of your building, which would be an absolute disaster at this point.
But look at the great sunset that I got.
But I was just traveling immediately before coming on to this Zoom, and can verify that just about everything on Long Island is flooded out of control at this point. So hopefully everybody is settled in a place for the next hour or so, and we can go through some interesting and informative information. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome and to thank Dr. David Rosenthal for participating with us in this series of seminars and in this informative learning series. David Rosenthal is an allergy and immunology and internal medicine specialist at Northwell Health. He's the medical director of the Center for Young Adult, Adolescent, and Pediatric HIV, the Center for Transgender Care and Sexual Health, HIV PrEP STI program at Rego Park. Additionally, he is an attending physician at the Division of Allergy, Immunology, and Adult, Adolescent, and Pediatric and Clinical Immunology. He is an assistant professor of medicine and pediatrics at the Donald and Barbara Zucker School of Medicine at Hofstra Northwell. And I first met David a few years back. We honored him at an HRC golf outing, Human Rights Campaign golf outing. And he was a pleasure then and continues to remain a pleasure and an absolute asset to our community. So David, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you so much, Joe. It's really a pleasure to be here with everyone and exciting. You know, Joe and I had a great conversation at that golf outing, and I still have some really wonderful rainbow socks that I wear that I actually got at that event. If you, I don't know if you remember or not, but they have the VMM logo right on the side of them.
But I'm glad somebody wears them.
There you go. Great. So sounds great. So it's been interesting. And so, just a little bit about me. I'm an internal medicine doctor, and I trained largely in internal medicine, and I was in Newark, and I was in inner city Newark, basically, during the early peak of the HIV epidemic that was occurring, or pandemic that was occurring at that point. And so I started having a significant interest in that. I ended up then coming to Northwell Health and spending a year in a laboratory at the Feinstein Institutes, and then doing a 2-year clinical fellowship in allergy and immunology. And as I came out of that, I became the medical director. I was becoming the medical director of one of our programs, and I decided that instead of going and practicing medicine, I was going to be crazy and go back and get a PhD for another 5 years, much to the enjoyment of my family. And so I actually studied immune responses to viruses. Who knew that would be so exciting in the world of COVID, but that's made it a very interesting year for me. And with that, really, we've looked at things, and I kind of became the medical director for our adolescent HIV program. I was one of the very early adopters of HIV prevention, PrEP. And then I embedded services at Pride for Youth, an LGBT agency here on Long Island, so we could actually provide integrated medical care directly within the agencies that serve the LGBT community. And my patients started coming to me and saying, where can we get services for trans folks? We have to travel into New York City. We don't have an ability to do that. We have to take a day off of work. And so I kind of used if you build it, they will come type of a model, and said, let's create a program. So I took a program of children that were born with HIV and turned it into an adolescent HIV program. We created PrEP programs in 2 counties, and now we've created an HIV program really to serve the community. And a lot of the work that I do is working with health equity, and that's become very important. In making sure that the LGBT community get a piece of that health equity conversation. We need to make sure that we're addressing race, ethnicity, and diversity in healthcare, but also making sure that we're capturing information regarding preferred names, sexual orientation, gender identity, and making sure that we can provide the, as they call in the medical literature, the sexual minority populations. We can make sure that we're able to give everyone equal access to healthcare and make sure they can receive healthcare that meet their medical needs. And so I've been working with some people in Albany, and I'm on a task force to do some of that. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is really trying to make sure that issues of LGBT health are taught to residents. They're taught to the Hofstra School of Medicine. They're taught to our PAs. We know how to get a sexual history and understand what's going on. We don't assume heteronormality, and we don't assume that we're going to be doing certain practices based on certain identifications, but really talking to our patients and are having a conversation to figure out how we can address people's sexual health in a way that meets their needs. And that's really what the mission and the work that I've been doing a lot is recently. I'm pleased to see those that are here today, and we'll talk about a few things. One of the things that we've done is I've been in Fire Island the past couple of years out in Cherry Grove, where we do free HIV testing and other information, and I gave a conversation out there about men's health and about anal health, which is really important if we're talking about some of these issues. So that's a piece that we're going to touch on briefly. I'm going to touch also today briefly on HIV, and I want to make sure that everyone knows what PrEP is. You can't really be in the New York City subway system and not understand what PrEP is. But those of us that live and reside mostly in Long Island and then don't necessarily make it into the city, don't always necessarily know as much about PrEP and HIV prevention as they should. And then the thing I'm going to kind of close with is talking about the Healthy 2020 study, and really how we need to make sure that we're looking at information that's really important for people across the spectrum regarding their sexual health, and making sure that they take care of themselves. Because we know that individuals that are lesbians don't necessarily get as many mammograms as individuals should. We know that people don't necessarily receive the health care that they should be pursuing. And we want to make sure that everyone's health is being optimized based off their identity, and make sure that they can present themselves comfortably to a provider in a way that really makes sense for them. And then at the end, we'll be able to open up for some questions and see other things that we're going on for. So that's a little bit what I'll be talking about, and I'll hand off to Joe, and he'll be able to inform us about all these great legal things. Joe, should I get going, or do you want to go first?
Excellent. Well, you know what? You did say that you have another engagement this evening, so why don't you go first? I'll follow up. This way, if we do run long or you need to go, you can feel free without having to cut yourself short.
Sounds great. I'm fine for a bit, so we're all good. So just a little bit that I wanted to kind of talk about is really talking about the importance of health equity within healthcare. And I think that a lot of the times we present ourselves to our healthcare providers and we basically talk about our heart and our weight and our height and other things like that. But many healthcare providers, and there's a lot of data, really don't ask questions or really aren't necessarily there to support individuals to understand how your sexual health is part of your healthcare. And I think that we really need to make sure that as individuals in the LGBT community, we are talking with our providers about our healthcare and about how our healthcare is changed or augmented by our sexual identity or our gender orientation, our gender expression. And I think that it's important that we're able to do that. One thing we always talk about is that, you know, I think there's a huge stigma for getting testing. And I really say that, and I say this to a lot to younger people when I speak at schools, and I speak at other audiences, that knowledge is power. So if you have more than one partner, or there's other things that are going on in your relationships, it's really important that you do get tested and you understand what your HIV, your hepatitis B and C status is. We have a lot of individuals that don't know what their HIV and hepatitis B and C status is. And the problem is that we're seeing is there's a large number of individuals that then can possibly transmit HIV or hepatitis B or C to others. And so what we want to do is we want to let you know what your diagnosis is and then make sure you have those resources to be able to treat yourself and be able to make sure that you can get the kind of health care that you're looking for across the board. One of the ways we can do that is through PrEP. PrEP is one pill once a day that prevents HIV. It's 92 to 98% effective. The main side effects that we talk about are going to be things that are going to involve the kidney or the bone density, but those side effects resolve once you're able to stop these medications. And it's important to realize that what that does is it actually is able to add a level of protection or a level of insurance is the way I explain it to someone. So when you're talking about PrEP, it's really a way to kind of keep yourself extra safe. And so some people say, I wear a condom, and that's great. And that may be what people are looking for, but also making sure that you can have PrEP. And PrEP is really for anyone who is having sex. And it doesn't matter necessarily what's going on. It can be for people that are cis or people that are trans, people that are straight or people that are gay, for people that are assigned male at birth, or people that are assigned female at birth. It really does not matter. PrEP is out there as a way to decrease transmission of HIV through sex. So what I say is that if you have multiple partners, or if you have gonorrhea, chlamydia, syphilis, those things don't come from the toilet seat. They don't come from the sky. They come from somewhere. So if you're treating those things, we need to say, how can we make sure that we're decreasing your risk for acquiring HIV? And so it's another piece that's a tool. The way I look at it is it's a tool in the toolkit. It's a piece of a resource that we can offer. And for some couples also, it adds to their intimacy because they feel that they're being safe. I take care of a lot of patients living with HIV and their partners. It's important to realize that if people have HIV and they're undetectable and they've stayed undetectable for 6 months, then there's a concept called U equals U, that undetectable is untransmittable. So that means that I cannot give HIV to my partner because I've got my HIV viral load detected, undetectable, very low, and it's been sustained that way for 6 months. Some people are very happy with that, and other people feel that it's important that they offer PrEP as a way to the partner so they can decrease the anxiety of having sex or decrease someone's concern. And so it's important to realize that both of those are options, and it's important that we have that information. So get an HIV test if you haven't had one. Make sure that you consider PrEP if that's something that you're doing, if you have multiple partners or something that you're concerned about. And also U equals U. If you have HIV or if you're dating someone with HIV and their viral load is undetectable, then they cannot transmit the HIV to you as long as they keep taking their medications and stay undetectable. I tell all my young patients, I say, carry around the app, have your lab results available, say, I'll show you yours if you show me mine. I mean my lab results. And I show you my lab results and you show me your lab results, and then you guys can show each other whatever else you want to show each other. So I think that it creates a level of transparency and honesty. It's a way of knowing what's going on with yourself and with your partner, and then creating that trust relationship between the person that you're going to be with in that sort of a relationship. So there's all sorts of different options that are available. I think one of the other pieces that we talk about is we know that individuals in the LGBT community using historical data do not access healthcare as much as they should. They don't see a doctor, they don't get necessarily tested, they don't even necessarily get mammograms, prostate exams, or evaluations for their healthcare as commonly or often as individuals should. And so it's very important that you're able to not ignore that part of your body and to ignore your healthcare. We also know that colon cancer and other kinds of cancer are increased. We know that there's issues with lung cancer. One of the first trans patients I saw actually was diagnosed with lung cancer on the first visit, and they've been able to do great since then. So it's very important that you get screening for what's going on with your health, and you talk to your doctor about what you do. I'm going to also touch in a little bit about substance abuse. Different people use different substances. We're all aware of the new New York State law regarding marijuana that's coming through, and people do all sorts of different things. My wish and ask is that you're safe and that you take care of yourself and that you discuss what you use with other people, and you always do it in safe settings, because I think that a lot of people have higher risk, and we are seeing an increased use of heroin in Long Island, and it's very important that we address that in all communities and make sure that we're able to understand that risk and understand how we can make sure we can help take care of people. So these are a few of the kind of the introductory topics that I kind of wanted to kind of begin talking about. I think it's really important that we're able to have open conversations. I always tell my patients, I said, am I scary? I'm not a scary doctor. We should be able to have a conversation, be able to talk about what's going on, and we should be able to figure out what's happening in your life so that you can take care of yourself. I think it's essential that you're able to see a provider that can do that. And that's the other thing that we've done with our transgender health practice is really, it doesn't matter if you're trans female, if you're trans male, if you're non-binary, if you're gender non-conforming. It really is, how do you present? How do you see your own gender? Cecilia Gentili is a friend of mine and someone who's in New York City and a trans activist. She was actually on Pose, and so she's an activist too as well. And she said in a very memorable way to me once, she said that your gender identity is what's between your ears, not what's between your hips. And it's that message, I think, that's really important, that we're able to keep that gender identity between your ears. And you can't look at someone and know if they are cis or trans. You can't look at someone and know if they're Caucasian or if they're Hispanic. We have to ask in healthcare. We have to understand what our patients need. And the way that can only happen is if healthcare settings open up this conversation to our patients, and then our patients are able to open up the conversation back to the healthcare profession. So in 2019 at Northwell Health, I was able to implement a change. We're asking people what their gender identity information is at registration across all 600 of our healthcare ambulatory practices across the whole health system. We had to train 6,000 registrars about what gender identity and sexual orientation is. And many of them had been living in Long Island for a long time and didn't understand the difference. It's important to remember that gender identity is how you identify as masculine or feminine, whereas your sexual orientation is who you're romantically attracted to. So people's sexual orientation is typically going to be straight, gay, bisexual, lesbian, and then my younger patients have made up all sorts of fun terms like bi-curious and pansexual and other kind of options that describe them in more greater depth. So I think it's important that we're there as providers. We're able to open these conversations and have transparent discussions and really figure out where healthcare needs are for individuals and then address them. So I've talked for a little bit. I think I'm going to pause for a little bit and hand off to Joe and see if he wants to go, and then we can tag team or we can touch base on issues and do Q&A and see how that goes for the last little bit. But I think that's kind of a good 20-minute introduction about some of the topics that I thought are really important for us to look at.
Excellent, and extremely important from just an information perspective. Thank you very much. And I would like to talk about today life planning, because Dr. Rosenthal works with his patients in making sure that they stay healthy, make sure that they have superior lives and that they're able to function in society and carry on with what they need to do. And I do the same thing really from a legal perspective, in that I work with people to plan for their lives, but not necessarily their health. I work with documents so that their health can be safeguarded, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But I work with my clients to make sure that they are covered from a life planning perspective, not only an estate planning perspective. There seems to be a stigma. If I talk to people about estate planning, they say, oh, I don't need to do that. I'm young, I'm healthy. I will do that when I'm older. My parents are doing that now. I don't need to do it. And I'm going to tell you exactly why everybody needs to think about life and estate planning, especially people within the LGBTQ community, especially for trans people. But what is life planning? Life planning addresses what happens in the event that you are incapacitated and cannot make your own decisions for yourself. So, if you have an illness that results in a severe disability or results in you being not able to communicate or make arrangements for your own healthcare decisions or your own affairs, you should have a document in place that allows someone else to make those decisions for you. But again, only if you cannot make those decisions on your own accord. So a healthcare proxy, which we'll explain a little bit more in a few minutes, will act to have someone make healthcare decisions for you if you're not able to make them on your own. A power of attorney also acts as a life planning document. Power of attorney will allow someone else to make decisions for you that are not healthcare related, but are more business and financial related. They'll allow someone to file your tax returns. They'll allow someone to make a claim for health insurance benefits, allow someone to access your bank account so that your bills can get paid, so that your checks can be deposited, et cetera, et cetera. Both of those documents act only while a person is alive and functioning. Both of those documents also terminate at death. And what happens then? Well, then the estate planning aspects of a plan, a life and estate plan, come into play. And those estate planning documents make sure that your loved ones are properly provided for and taken care of. If you don't have those estate planning documents in place, then the state, in our situation, New York State, but the state where you reside, will make the determination on your behalf, not only with respect to who receives your assets, but who makes your healthcare decisions as well. Now, I sit with many of my clients who are in the LGBT community, and they will tell me that they don't get along with family members, perhaps for whatever the reason might be. They don't agree with their lifestyle. They don't agree with their partners. They just don't accept them in many situations. And in many situations, there's been sort of a discontent between family relationships. So people generally, in many situations, do not want to have their parents, sometimes even their spouse, act as their healthcare agent. They often don't want their siblings to act as their healthcare agent or any other blood relationship that the state might choose if you don't have that very simple healthcare proxy in place. And a healthcare proxy will enable you to appoint anyone that you choose, anyone that you have faith in, that you believe knows you, that you believe knows what you would want in the event that you cannot make those decisions for yourself. New York, on the other hand, will just state what relative can make those decisions for you. And if for whatever the reason you do not have any close relatives, or you don't have any close relatives that are willing to make those decisions, then it will be necessary for somebody to go into court and have a guardian appointed for you. And that's one of the last things that you would ever want, because a guardian appointed by a court is someone that you don't know, that doesn't know your background, your history, your health, your life. So there's no sense in going through that long, drawn out, and quite honestly expensive process for absolutely no reason. So we do these life planning documents so that everybody can continue along their path to health, financial, and legal appropriateness, for lack of a better term, so that you could have everything in place. I also find that many people in the LGBTQ community are estranged from family members. If you do not want your family members or a particular family member or members to inherit your assets, then you need to put proper planning, estate planning documents in place. Again, if you don't have those documents in place, then the state will choose, or the state chooses by operation of law, who gets your assets. As an example, if you are survived by parents, your parents will receive 100% of your assets. If you're not survived by parents, but you're survived by siblings, your siblings will receive 100% of your assets divided across the board. If you are survived by a spouse, but no children, your spouse will receive all of your assets. Now you might say, okay, that's a really good thing. And we have marriage equality now. So why do I need to do all of this planning? Well, your spouse might receive all of your assets, but you might not want your spouse to receive all of those assets. You might want to receive a part, some, a specific asset, or some form of a combination of assets you might want to give to people who are not in that list of relatives who would otherwise inherit by what we call intestacy. Also, the state will make the decision, if you have children and a spouse, to split your assets between your surviving spouse and your children. So your surviving spouse would receive the first $50,000 in value of your assets and half of the balance. Your children would receive the other half. Now, I have children and I also have a spouse. I don't want to provide for my children before I provide for my spouse and make sure that he's properly cared for his lifetime should something happen to me. So I've made provision to provide for my spouse through the use of trusts and other beneficial provisions in my estate plan documents so that he will be protected for his lifetime, and after his death, then my children will be protected. So you can take it out for various steps, and make sure that not only are the people that are close to you currently are covered and protected, but also the people next in line, for lack of a better term, are also covered and protected. Another thing about having a spouse and leaving everything to your spouse, I've often come across clients who have married, especially later in life, since we were not given the opportunity to marry until the most recent years. I often come across people who say, I don't need my spouse's assets if he dies. I have set myself up very well from a financial perspective, and there's no reason for me to inherit anything from my spouse. He's better off giving those assets to his siblings. He's better off providing for his parents during their elder years. He's better off giving the assets to charities so that all of society may be helped. So you want to really look at that And you want to look at it on an individual basis, from an individual perspective and from a couple perspective. And you want to decide, both as an individual and as a couple, how your assets should pass for both of you. Very important. The other thing that you need to know is that if you are married, your spouse has an absolute right to receive a portion of your assets. So you cannot disinherit a spouse unless you have an agreement that says, I, as the spouse, agree that I can be disinherited. And that would be through a prenuptial or a postnuptial agreement, whereby the spouse agrees, I don't have to receive all of the estate of my spouse who might predecease me. I'll just take a portion, or I don't need anything at all. You can't do that unless you have the appropriate documentation in place. Otherwise, your spouse is automatically entitled to receive what effectively constitutes half of your estate, even if you have no documentation to the contrary, or if you have documentation that basically excludes your spouse from your estate plan, but you don't have the proper agreements with your spouse allowing you to do otherwise. And the same thing is true with respect to retirement accounts, in that your spouse, if not a beneficiary of your retirement account, would have to waive the right to be a beneficiary. So that all comes into the plan when I sit with my clients and go over preliminaries. What do you need to do to implement a life and estate plan? I just said when I sit with my clients, I go over all the preliminaries. I talk to them as individuals. I talk to them as a couple. I talk to them as to what their family relationships look like, what their friendships look like, the people in their world that they trust, the people in the world that they don't trust, the people in their world that they get along with very well, and the people in their world that they don't get along with very well. What I'm saying here is that you need to find a lawyer who is going to explore your life and explore the way you live and the way you are comfortable. So the first step in doing a life and estate plan is to find a lawyer. How do you do that? Well, you're going to ask around, you're going to ask those people that you do trust. Who did you use for your estate plan? Do you have an estate plan? Did you use somebody really good? Have you heard of somebody really good? I need somebody that I can trust. So who would you recommend? You have a lawyer on this Zoom call, so you can also do things like that. Participate in various seminars, participate in presentations, get a certain level of comfort with the attorney that you do choose. Because the second part is that you need to discuss your thoughts, your relationships, your family relationships, your loved ones, and perhaps those who are not your loved ones in preparing this plan. One of the things that I always do, and that most likely any estate planning practitioner should do, is to find out who all of your relatives, your blood relatives are, who would otherwise inherit your assets if you had no will, because those relatives will also be given a notice of the probate of your will and will have the right to contest your will should they feel that your will was entered into under fraud or undue influence, or that you didn't have the mental capacity to sign a will, things along those lines. So it's very important that your attorney know all about those contingent factors that might be going on in your life. The next thing you would do is discuss your documents and a plan that will serve your needs. Your attorney will ask you for a list of your assets, together with how those assets are owned and the beneficiary designations on those assets, because any beneficiary designation or jointly owned asset falls outside of your will. It's not a probate asset. It's an asset that passes by operation of the fact that you have a beneficiary or a joint owner. So we want to make sure that we're taking all of those assets into account, not only the assets that would fall under your will, but the assets that would not fall under your will, to make sure that they would pass to your intended beneficiaries, and that you're not making any mistakes in your estate plan by just naming a beneficiary that perhaps shouldn't be on that documentation. We then review all potential benefits that are available to our clients. I review with them, well, what would happen if one of you passed away, if it's a couple? What would happen if one of you passed away? Would the survivor have sufficient assets and resources to live the lifestyle that he or she lived before? And we discuss various alternative means of making sure that lifestyle can stay in effect. We look at, as I said, governmental benefits, so that if you're married, for instance, we talk about Social Security and Social Security survivorship benefits and how that would affect a surviving spouse. And then we draft documents. We review the documents, and then finally the documents are signed and you are done. And I hear 9 out of 10 times when that pen is put down and the documents are signed, this huge sigh of relief, because people say to me, I've been thinking about that for years, and it just wasn't that hard to do. And of course, I agree with them and say, yeah, everybody should know it wasn't that hard to do, and the process isn't that difficult once we put it into its designated slots and make sure that all of those slots are covered. So what are those estate planning documents? Well, first you would have a will. A will provides for the distribution of your assets only to the people that you would like your assets distributed to. It also elects or appoints an executor of your estate, and the executor of your estate is responsible for collecting all of your assets, for administering your estate, for paying your creditors, and then for distributing those assets to your beneficiaries, either outright or in a trust, which could be in your will. And I often recommend trusts for married same-sex couples, strictly because of the fact that often we do not have children, and therefore our assets at death go back to our family members or friends or to charitable causes. But often when I sit with clients and I say to them, how would you like your assets to be distributed? They say, well, I'm leaving everything to my spouse. And then he or she will be able to use it for their benefit. And when I ask them the next question, which is, okay, then what happens at his or her death, meaning the second spouse's death, they look at me and they sort of shake their head and they say, I don't know. I made provision, I'm leaving everything to my spouse. I don't know what happens after that. And when I tell them, well, then your surviving spouse is more than likely to leave those assets to his or her personal family members or friends or charities, and not necessarily your family members, friends, or charities. Their eyes wide open, or open wide, and they say, oh, I never really thought about that. So we use trusts. We use trusts, as I indicated before, to provide for a spouse during his or her lifetime. And then at his or her death, those assets can pass back to the way you, the original grantor, would want them to pass. Your executor in your will is responsible for making sure that your estate is carried out the way you want it to be carried out. Now, who should be your executor? It should be a trusted person who has some financial acumen, but is also a person who can work with attorneys, work with your financial advisors, work with your beneficiaries, work with your family to make sure that everything is properly taken care of. If you come into my office and you tell me, I am afraid that my family might contest my will because they don't like my partner, then I'm going to suggest that over and above a will, that you have a revocable trust, or what we call a living trust. A living trust is very important because it spells out all of the terms that your will would otherwise spell out as far as the distribution of your assets, etc. But it's not admitted to probate or to the surrogate's court, where a surrogate judge will say, okay, this will looks good to me. I'm going to acknowledge that it's a valid will, but before I do that, you have to put the decedent's family on notice, send them a written notice saying, we're submitting this will for probate, and please let us know if you have any issues or problems with that, and then they will have the right, as I said before, to contest your will. And I see it more often than not. I even see it happening with people that absolutely have no cause to contest a will, but they do it in any event just to see if there's something in it for them. And if they're big enough pains, then the executor of an estate might be willing to settle with them. So in those types of situations where there is that potential, I would recommend to my clients that they do a revocable living trust, which would not be submitted to probate, and therefore you never need a family member to contest that document and the distribution of your estate in accordance with the way you want it to be distributed. So we have a will. We potentially have a revocable trust. If we don't have a separate revocable trust, because you're okay with submitting your will to probate, and by the way, there's no problem with submitting a will to probate in New York. If your parents live in Florida, they will tell you all about how they have revocable trusts, because probate is such a pain and an extended, expensive process. It is in Florida, but it's not like that in New York. So don't be afraid of having a will. If you don't need a trust, you shouldn't have a trust in New York, because they are a little bit more expensive in general to prepare. Now, over and above a trust and a will, I often recommend a package of documents. And those documents also include the life planning documents that I mentioned before, which would be the power of attorney, the healthcare proxy, and I also recommend a living will. A living will is a document that states, if I am in a condition which would otherwise cause my death if it were not for medical intervention, then I choose not to have medical intervention just to prolong my life for no reason. Very important document, because in New York, we don't have any statutory authority for ending one's life at any point in time. But what we do have is a document whereby you can state to your healthcare providers and to any other people who may have an interest that you do not want to be kept alive by artificial means of support should you be in that situation. Similarly, a funeral directive allows someone else to make your funeral arrangements for you, and it also allows you to specify what arrangements you would like to make for that person that you appoint to carry out. So without a funeral directive, again, your closest blood relatives would be the ones to make that decision. And I'm going to tell you a story that I will never forget, because it's such a horrific story, but it's something that everybody should sort of remember in the back of their heads. I had clients who were a couple. They were a same-sex couple, not married. It was pre-marriage equality. They were partners, domestic partners, lived together, had a life together, and one of them was very ill, and he passed. He passed before we had a chance to prepare his documents and for him to sign them. So his sister made his funeral arrangements, and his partner participated in those arrangements, and everything was as good as it could be in those dire set of circumstances. But there was an insurance policy that the decedent left his partner. And after the funeral took place, his partner asked his sister for the remains. And his sister took offense at the fact that his partner was left a life insurance policy. And she said, sure, I'll give you the remains in exchange for the proceeds of the life insurance policy that you received. So he had to effectively buy his partner's remains from his sister, from the decedent's sister. And I don't ever want to see that happen to anybody that I know again. So it's very important that you have these documents in place for lifetime to make sure that your loved ones are adequately provided for both during your lifetime and after your death. And at that, I am going to leave it, I suppose, for some questions and answers. I have a question for you, Dr. Rosenthal. I often read as an attorney all of the negative effects that various drugs can have on one's system, and I suppose I don't do litigation at all. I don't do any court work, no personal injury work, et cetera, but you do read, oh, the effect that this drug has, the effect that that drug has, and I've read that PrEP has some negative effects, and I'm wondering if you could comment on that.
Great, so perfect question. So one of the things that really I explain to all of my patients when they come in is that every medication that you take has certain side effects. If you take too much Tylenol, it's going to cause problems with your liver. So I think every medication has side effects. The side effects that we see mostly with PrEP are going to be a little bit of nausea, vomiting, and upset stomach for the first 7 to 10 days, and that goes away after a while. I always tell my patients, if you have that short-term effect, we can give you something to stop those symptoms temporarily. And that always self-resolves as your body gets used to that. From then on, the other side effects that we worry about are long-term questions that could happen if people would have problems with their kidney or would have problems with their bones. And those are two things that we monitor. So one of the advantages with PrEP is it's not just a medication, it's really kind of a package of things. And so how often do, let's say, young 30-year-old individuals come to see the doctor every 3 months or whatever to get there, to look for STIs or whatever, and look for other things that are going on in their life and have a conversation with their provider? It doesn't really happen. So I think that if you're able to engage in PrEP, then what you're doing is you're seeing your provider every 3 to 6 months. You're taking a look at your kidney function every 3 months, and you're making sure that you can get resources that you need and be able to have that information. So I think those are the main things we talk about. I always say that if you see something, say something. And so really make sure that you're able to bring those questions up and talk to your doctor about your situation. And if your kidney function is at a certain point, then you would maybe need to stop PrEP. I can tell you of the 500 people or so that I've seen that have been on PrEP since this started, since I've been giving PrEP, I really have only had one person stop PrEP because of side effects. And so I think because of these kinds of long-term side effects, and that's because I said your kidneys just aren't doing well with that. And last but not least, there's 2 medications available for PrEP that you should talk about with the doctor. There's 2 different brands of medication, there's 2 different names of medications. One is under the name brand of Truvada, and the other one's on the name brand of Descovy. And the Descovy has less of these side effects than the Truvada does, but both of them are extremely safe for patients that are young and healthy and don't have other outstanding medical problems. So I think they're really important questions to kind of look at and see that was there. Kind of going back to you, I thought a really interesting question that came up is that I see the importance of healthcare proxies and living wills all the time in my clinical practice. So thankfully, one of the things that I take care of a lot of patients with a lot of different conditions, but unfortunately I do take care of some patients that are necessarily very, very ill. And certainly during COVID, we saw this. And as a clinician, as a medical provider, I can't underscore enough the importance of making sure that we have the ability to understand what the patient's desires are. And a relationship with your patient and discussing that with your provider is helpful, but having it in writing through both the living will and the healthcare proxy really let you know let your provider know what you have. So the only bit of information that you didn't discuss that I think is really important is not only create these documents, not only make sure the important people in your life have these documents, but make sure that your physicians and your medical providers have these documents as well. So that if they need to be enacted upon, it's not something that's locked inside of a safe inside of your house where no one can get to it, but it's something that's available so they know who can access that information and really make sure those documents are available. These are really critical resources that we interact with during patients' last days, and really making sure that that's available and something that's important.
And that's a really good point, because people don't necessarily realize that when you sign a will, you only sign one, because we don't want to have conflicting documents out there. We don't want various people to have duplicates of wills that one person might submit to the court, another person might submit to the court. So you only sign one will. But I always have my clients sign at least 4 healthcare proxies, 4 living wills, and various other documents. And at the end of the signing, we put a package together, and I keep 1 and I give them 3. And I say, okay, I have 1 in my file, so that if you're traveling and you don't have access to these documents, anybody can always give me a call and I can get them to where they need to be. But you, as the client, also need to provide one of your 3 counterparts to your attending physician and to the healthcare agent that you've named, because it's very important that you appoint a primary person to act first and foremost, and then a contingent person in case that primary person can't act on your behalf. And all of those individuals should have a counterpart of those documents.
That's great. And I guess the other piece that I kind of thought that was really interesting that we're talking about is the importance of the similarity of some of the work that we're doing, because in some ways, a lot of what we're doing is we're doing preventative care, right? So we're not taking care of problems after the fact. And this has become very important within healthcare all throughout Northwell Health, is we want to take care of people to prevent problems from happening before they happen and be able to initiate those plans in anticipation so that we don't have to deal with things in a crisis situation. And so that's why we're talking about things like PrEP, which is sort of like birth control, right? It's not a reactive modality, it's a preventative modality. And that's why we're talking about things like getting HIV testing and understanding your sexual health so that you can do things preventatively. And very much you were talking about things that sounded like that were really very much planning for the future so that you didn't have to wait for the situation to occur and then have to deal with something in a crisis, but rather to have plans put together ahead of time. So I think in a lot of ways, you may deal with the courts or with the law, and I may deal with the medicine, but I think in a lot of ways we're doing similar work, really helping people plan for their future in a way that helps keep them healthy and make sure their wishes are being met.
I couldn't have said it better. You're absolutely correct, and thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Dr. Rosenthal, Mr. Milizio. Does anybody else, any of the attending people have any questions? If not, you can find contact info both for Dr. Rosenthal and Mr. Milizio in the chat section. I posted our contact info. There you go. Dr. Rosenthal also posted another link. Wonderful. And we recorded this. This will be on our YouTube channel likely tomorrow for you to rewatch and share with friends and other people. Again, thank you. Thank you for everybody who attended this rainy afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Rosenthal. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd also like to thank you, Roy, for pulling this together with Annette from Northwell Health to really kind of help coordinate and bring together this opportunity for us to have these conversations and be able to share in this discussion.
A pleasure. And we look forward to the next webinar on June 3rd. Same time, same channel.
So we'll be celebrating Pride Month throughout the month with more informative discussions and information. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to working with you again, Dr. Rosenthal.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good evening. Be safe.
You too, Annette. You take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.